Hey everyone, we gotta get back on the little Unimog 421 project because even though I was driving around in this in the last couple of videos and it looks mostly intact by now, there's actually still a lot of work I have to do on this. There is still a good bit of metal work left to be done as we have to fix up and mount the front fenders out here. Also, we have to repair and assemble the doors on this, as well as the seats. We need to fix up the seat mounts and put new cushions on those so I don't have to sit on a jerry can anymore. And while I was driving it around, I also found a few little things we have to attend to. There is a couple of leaks on the engine and some other stuff. And also we have to finish up the hydraulics. Most of that stuff is still completely missing from this. And we gotta finish up the rear as well with the fenders back here, and also we have to build light mounts and all of this stuff on the back of it as well. But the very first thing I gotta do is get the wheels off of this, because I've actually sold them. Well, the tires are worthless, but the steel wheels are still just fine, and that's what the guy wanted. So we gotta get the other ones on here, and now I can finally show you why I wanted these specific wheels on this Unimog. Now, I should just say the tires on these are completely done as well, unfortunately, because it's actually some pretty expensive tires. But they are so dry rotted, just from driving them in here, they left marks on the floor because the rubber is just disintegrating. And even though they look fine from a distance, if you look close, you can see they are completely cracked and falling apart. So if I took these tires out on the road, they would probably just explode. But the tires I'm getting on here, they will be the same size, it's just going to be some different ones. Anyway, let me show you why I want these on here. So the Unimog 421 is a bit of a weird size because it shares a lot of the undercarriage and axles with the older 411. And that is a really small Unimog. But this still has the cab and body of a 406, which is a fairly big Unimog, at least in terms of these older ones. This means you end up with a big cab on a small chassis. So when you look at the 421, you can see the wheels, they are kind of tugged in underneath the cab because the body is just a lot wider than the actual track width. Now, to make it even weirder, this is actually not nearly as bad on the open top or convertible 421s, because even though they look very similar on the outside, when you have a convertible style cab, the whole cab is actually a little bit narrower, like 2 to 3 inches narrower than the cab on the closed cab versions. So even though they look very similar, they actually share just about no parts on the cab itself. Whereas this closed cab shares a lot of parts with something like the 406. Now, those wheels that I've been getting, they have a slightly different offset. They should bring the wheels out a little bit further, which should hopefully give it a more uniform look, or at least that's what I'm trying to achieve here. So let's try and put one of them on so we can actually see the difference. Alright, so now I got one of my new wheels on there and we can do a bit of a comparison. So you can see the old original wheels here, how they are sort of tugged in and sitting in further than the edge of the body. Whereas these new wheels, they are pretty much going to be lining up with the side of the body out here. Now, of course, there is going to be a fender that's going to be sticking out a little bit further, but overall, I think this is going to look a lot better. Now, another reason I wanted these wheels specifically is because these are 20-inch wheels as opposed to the 18-inch that are on here originally. Because a lot of old military vehicles were also running 20-inch wheels, that means there is a lot more tires to pick from when you are in 20s rather than the 18s. But I should just say, if you have 18s on your Unimog, there is still a bunch of tires to pick from. Also, some that are high-speed rated for the Unimogs specifically. Now, speaking of tire sizes, I should also just mention that the ones that I'm going to be putting on here, they will be a little bit bigger than these. As I said, it's not going to be these specific tires because they are just too rotten, but it is going to be the same size. And they are just about, what, 2 inches taller overall. So it is going to go up like one size in tire. Now, just one more thing that is worth mentioning when we are talking about the wheels of these older Unimogs is that the steel wheels are actually a little bit thicker on the later, heavier models like the 406 and 416 and such. This is something someone told me and I didn't actually know, but these older ones, they measure out to about 6 millimeters, and these later ones, they measure out to about 8 millimeters. So this was obviously done to strengthen the wheel on the heavier models so they won't bend and distort. It's a subtle difference, but it's something to keep in mind if you are building out a heavier Unimog. Well, look at that. This looks much better already. It looks a lot more beefy sitting up on those. Well, I was gonna say wider tires, but they're not actually wider. They are just further out. But they are a little bit taller though. I should just say you can run those slightly bigger 12.5 by 20 tires on this, but you are gonna be pushing the limits of how much you can realistically pull with that little 40-45 horsepower engine that are in these 421s. So you really don't want to go too big because it's going to start struggling at some point. Now this looks very good to me. Oh, and yes, now I do have 2 different colors of wheels on this, with the green ones over here on one side and the white ones over here on the other side. But they're not going to stay this color. I do have to take all these wheels off again to mount some new tires on them. And at that point, I can go and paint the wheels as well. But I'm actually not sure what color I should go with. I was thinking of just painting them black, but I'm not sure if that's going to be a little bit too boring. So actually, let me know what you think. What color wheels would go really well with this sandy color that the truck has now? But now with the tires mounted on this thing, we can start figuring out the fenders for it. And I have a few sets laying around. That set is completely rotten. And I have these. They are actually the ones that came with this truck, although they are also a little bit rotten back here. So they are going to need some repairs for these to work. And I have this set as well. Now, I know it looks rusty, but that's just because they were never painted. They're actually not bad. Problem is, those are from a 406 model, so this little tab right here is not in the same place as it is on these out here. This means these are going to sit further out. I don't really want that, so to use these, I would have to move these mounts, also the ones that go down here. Also, these are cut at a bit of an angle. These are not, so I would have to take out a chunk of this. So you know what? I think I'm just going to repair the original ones for this truck and reuse those. That way I'm still going to have a spare set for another truck someday. So yeah, let's fix up the original fenders for this and just use those. From what I've seen, it is very typical that these fenders start rusting right in this bit right here because you have 2 separate pieces of metal that are overlapping in this part and just spot welded together. So moisture gets in there and they just start rusting from the inside. So I'm not even going to spend time recreating this. I'm just going to cut out this whole part and put in one single patch, turning this into one piece of steel. Now I'm going to have quite a bit of time to kill in between those layers of paint, so let's go ahead and start focusing on some rear fenders for this. Now the ones that were on this were completely rotted away. There was really nothing but the upper frame left, so there was nothing left to repair, so I'm gonna have to start from scratch. Now it is possible to just buy some rear fenders. They are still being made as an aftermarket thing, but they're not exactly cheap, so I'm gonna go ahead and try to build my own. There were several different versions of fenders for these, but I would like to try and make some that kind of look like the original ones that were on here. And it just so happens that that type was exactly the same as you would often find on the 411 model, which I just so happen to have next door. And one of the only things that is not completely rusted away on this one are these rear fenders. Now I do want to keep these on this, so I'm not going to take them off, but I can get all of the measurements I need of these and try to replicate it. Okay, so I am going to make a few changes to this thing, mostly just to make it easier for myself to build this, because I don't have any reliable way to make these indents in the sheet metal like this. Now, this is just something you do to stiffen up and strengthen some of this thin stuff. Now, I know there are tools specifically for doing this, but I don't have those, and I don't think I'm going to have access to them either. So what I'm going to do is just move up to some slightly thicker steel and give it a nice strong edge all the way around. I know I'm going to be able to do that. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to change how these ends here attach to the top frame, because once again we have some of this overlapping metal that always starts to rust. So to avoid that, I'm probably just going to do this out in one piece. So there's going to be a few subtle differences, but the overall shape and dimensions are going to be the same. Well, now I got a whole lot of little bends to do. I have all these sides that I have to bend in at 90 degrees to stiffen this whole thing up. But I'm not even going to try and do it with my little bender because it's not very good with 2mm, and it's also not very good for getting into these little tight spots. So I think we're going to go off again to my workplace and borrow some of their tools. They should just sponsor the build at this point. Alright, so while I leave those fenders to dry, there is another thing I want to address. So I mentioned that when I was test driving around in this, I found a couple of leaks, and part of it is the valve cover up here. You can see how it's all covered in this dirty, greasy stuff. It's all the dust that is being caught because the whole thing is covered in oil. Part of it is coming from these bolts up on the top, just because I didn't use the correct sealing washers down there. I didn't have the right ones, so I just used some copper washers, and that is clearly not good enough because there's not a whole lot of force on those bolts. They're only tightened to, I think it's about 15 or 20 Newton meters, so about half of what you would normally tighten an M8 bolt. And that's just because there is nothing underneath here, so if you tighten down on these really hard, you run the risk of cracking this aluminum cover. But this also means that it's not putting a whole lot of pressure on the valve cover gasket. And the one I put on here, I do remember that it felt kind of stiff, and also it's not very tall. It's not even coming close to this edge up here. So it's leaking out pretty badly down here in the corner, and that's just because that's the lowest corner with the way the engine is tilted. So I have a new gasket for that. This one is specifically for Unimogs. I don't remember what that is. I think I just had that on my shelf already and used it here, but clearly it's no good. So let's do something about this. Nah. Yeah, definitely feels softer. I like to give the gaskets just a very thin coat of some kind of grease. I have no proof of this, but I feel that it helps them to seat down better. Yes. There we go. Now, I would imagine back in the day, they probably used some kind of fiber washer or something around these, but I'm going to be using these instead. They are little hydraulic seals. They have a little built-in rubber gasket on them, so I think they'll work pretty well for this. I did just go and double check, and the torque on these bolts is just 10 Newton meters, so there's really not a lot of pressure on that gasket. Right, there we go. Here's hoping that did the trick. Alright, it is a while later and I'm done painting all this stuff and it looks like it's all dried up just fine. So let's go ahead and start reassembling things and get it mounted on the truck. right, here we go. Now we got some fenders all the way around. This is looking pretty good. I'm actually quite happy with how that turned out. It's looking more and more complete. I would actually really like to take this out for a little test drive just to see how it drives on these slightly bigger tires. And also, we of course have to test drive the new valve cover gasket. But I don't really want to sit and slide around on a jerry can in here, so I really want to put some seats in this. But I'm not gonna get into that in this video. This one has gone on long enough. But I'm gonna keep working on this, so hopefully it shouldn't be too long until you see the next episode of this project. So thank you all for watching along, and I'll see you in the next one.